Outside the city of Zilin located in China's Inner Mongolia region, there was a happily married couple named Guo Yingji and Wang Xian who worked together at a brick factory near the South Coal Mine. Guo worked the night shift at the factory, while Wang was the one who sold the bricks after they were finished being manufactured. Guo was described as popular and honest, and once he was done with his long day of work, he would often his wife with her own work selling bricks to construction sites. On August 7, 2013, Wang's family was unable to contact her or Guo for 2 days straight by then having last heard from them on August 5th. After 2 days of no contact, her family went to their home and saw the front door was locked with a padlock, which was unusual for the area. Wang's battery electric car was still parked in the driveway, and while the house was locked from the outside, the lights and TV were still on even if there was no sign of Guo or Wang themselves. Due to their suspicions, they called the police. After the police entered the home to begin investigating, they found no obvious signs of foul play such as fighting, blood, or breaking and entering. There was a laundry tub in the living room, and some clothes are hanging in the room. On the small table in the bedroom were a pair of chopsticks and some food, including only about a quarter of a bottle of beer, leftover bones from meat, and a bag of small flour rolls. Since Wang was known not to be a drinker, this leftover food was likely from Guo when he was last in the house. Guo had likely left in a hurry based on his unfinished food and drink and the fact that his shoes were still in the home but not his slippers, indicating that he put on whatever was nearby and rushed out. And lastly, although they locked the door, the lights and TV were still on. The police figured that not only did they leave in a hurry, but they likely didn't intend to be out for long. Police searched the house further, and the couple's clothing and daily necessities were all accounted for, so while they left in a hurry, they didn't intend to be out for long. White Wang's electric car was still in the driveway. The couple's other vehicle, Guo's black Hyundai Elantra, was missing. Unfortunately, due to most of the area being surrounded by farmyard and low bungalows, there was no place to put a camera. The police had no CCTV to track the car and where the car went. The police then attempted to track the couple's movements. On August 5, 2013, Wang went to work at the brick factory as usual, worked until noon, and drove home alone by herself. Meanwhile, cameras and toll booths along China National Highway 303 showed Guo driving to Zilin alone at around 9 a.m. As it turns out, he went to Zilin to collect a sum of 10,000 yuan that was owed to him by an acquaintance. After returning home, he went to the brick factory at 12 p.m., met with a client, made a sale of 100,000 yuan in bricks, and received a deposit of 46,000 yuan on the spot. He then picked up a colleague and dropped her off at the South Coal Mine and received another payment of 56,000. So in total, when Guo disappeared, he was carrying a total sum of 50,000 yuan after spending some of the money beforehand. The police questioned the couple's neighbors, but they were unable to offer much aside from the fact that they had seen the two walking in their yard that day. At 3 p.m., a truck driver who knew and worked with Guo attempted to call him, only to be informed that his phone was turned off. He tried calling Wang next, but her phone too was turned off. The next day he tried calling them again, but their phones were still off. Based on this timeline, they likely went missing between 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. on August 5th, and that when they went missing, Guo was carrying large amounts of cash that wasn't found in their home. Although the police didn't yet rule out that they just ran away, they considered the disappearance to be suspicious. They left their home in a hurry, never contacted their friends or family for 2 days, and were carrying a large amount of missing cash. The police investigated the disappearance as foul play, and that the motive was likely financial. The police then began looking for suspects and ended up finding not one but 3. On the morning of August 5th, 3 migrant workers, or at least men dressed as them, got off a bus that arrived from Zilin carrying big and small bags, walked to the door of Guo house closest to the road and sat down. Afterwards, the 3 of them took out a deck of playing cards and started playing, watching the cars coming and going on the road from time to time, as if they were waiting for something. The neighbors described the men as being in their 30th to 40th, and were a bit concerned as they had never seen the men before. The men presumably came from their homes to work at the South Coal Mine and waited for someone to come pick them up. But curiously, the residents and neighbors never saw these men leave and didn't see them again. Due to their sudden appearance and disappearance and waiting in front of Guo and Wang's house on the day they went missing, the police suspected that when they saw Guo driving home with his expensive car, the 3 improvised a new plan to kill him, as they assumed he was likely rich. The police got to work tracking these 3 men down. The 3 men stayed at a nearby quarry in the afternoon to work before retiring to a worker's dormitory. The 2 only stayed in the dormitory for 1 night before packing up their belongings and abruptly leaving and abandoning their new job. Due to the short amount of time, they stayed. Their employers weren't even given their phone numbers or names. The police were able to speak to their middleman Zhanqing, who introduced the three to this job. Unfortunately, Tan wasn't much help. He told the police that the three men were introduced to him by others and that the only thing he knew about them is that they hailed from Sichuan province. Tan didn't know why they abandoned their new job or where they could have gone. Tan was, however, not very clean himself. Tan, a man in his 40s from Zillenhot, ran a computer consumables store and had a reputation for having a hot and confrontational personality. He also met Guo the day he disappeared, as he was the one who gave and owed Guo the 10,000 yuan. For several years, Tan would borrow money from Guo but kept holding off on paying him back until Guo finally had enough and ordered that his money be returned. It is said that Tan had to borrow 4,000 yuan from other friends in order to make the payment. The three migrant workers appeared at Guo's house not long after this happened. Tan soon became the fourth suspect in this case. The police checked Guo's phone records, and the last call Guo received was at 1 a.m. from an unknown number. This was oddly enough the very first time Guo was ever contacted by this number. Guo likely left after receiving this call. The number came from a temporary burner phone and only ever made 3 calls before being discontinued. The other 2 calls this number made were to 2 businessmen simply called Zhanqing and Chen Si. These 2 men were easily tracked down and questioned. Zhang claimed that the caller spoke in a strange local accent. The man told Zhang that he had an aunt and wanted him to come to a hotel, have a look at the item, and discuss its price. The caller deliberately coughed often and tried to change his voice, tipping Zhang off to the trap, and thus he refused to show up. Chen told the police that the caller wanted to have him come to a hotel to discuss his coal business, but Chen also knew what was going on and refused to show up. Zhang, Chen, and Guo were all moderately successful in the area, especially with the South Coal Mine, so the caller was likely a local and maybe even knew the 3, with Guo falling for the caller's trick while Zhang and Chen saw through it. Both Zhang and Chen said that they didn't know Tan. The police assumed that whoever was responsible likely knew that Guo had money on him at the time, so they next investigated the 2 people who bought bricks from Guo the day he went missing. Wang Tian and Lin Kang, in their 30 seconds and 40 seconds respectively, were the 2 customers that day. Wang was a middleman who earned a little bit of money from reselling materials he bought, while Lin usually followed and also worked with Wang. Both were financially struggling. After leaving the brick factory, CCTV cameras on China National Highway 303 showed that they didn't return to Zillenhot until the evening. When the police tracked them down, they were unable to explain what they were doing that afternoon, and they also knew Zhang and Chen. Everything seemingly lined up for Wang Tianyi and Lin to be the killers. They had motive, knew that Guo had money. Witnesses said they were driving Wang's car, and Lin suddenly came into money after Guo and Wang Xian's disappearance. Lin was able to pay off all his debts. One night he invited his friends to eat and drink. He ended up drinking too much, became heavily intoxicated. While in this state, took out a large amount of money from his pocket and threw it into the air. The owner of the hotel he was at called the police over this, who arrived and took the money away. He sobered up the next morning. He arrived to collect the money and claimed that Wang lent it to him. The 2 were summoned to the police station for questioning, and both were very clearly nervous. The 2 denied buying bricks from Guo and denied that they were even at the South Coal Mine. For an alibi, they claimed they were drinking at a restaurant before later going back home to continue drinking. The police, due to their circumstantial only case, had to release them. Luckily for the police, the 2 seemingly went out of their way to make them suspicious. After they left the police station at 11 p.m., they drove back to the police station alone, and on the 2nd and 3rd night after, they went back to the building and walked around, as well as peering through the windows. By all accounts, they appeared to be observing how seriously the police were investigating the case. On August 16th, the police found Guo and Wang Xian's car. The car was found in a community parking lot in the town of Beicheng, located 200 kilometers away from Zillenhot. The car had been parked there for a while and had a coating of dust on it. The license plate was also removed. The police were able to confirm the car as the couple's based on the engine number. The interior of the car was relatively clean, and the police found no blood stains, fingerprints, or any signs of a struggle. The only items of note were some discarded cigarettes. The cigarettes proved to be very important, as Guo and Wang didn't smoke and were adamant about keeping their car clean, even refusing to allow others to smoke inside of it. DNA taken from the cigarettes would surely point police to those responsible. So the police took Wang Tian and Lin's DNA samples to compare to the cigarettes. Despite their suspicious behavior, lack of an alibi, motive, opportunity, and Lin's sudden riches, the DNA was not a match. They, however, did have the DNA on file. It belonged to a man named Zhanqing, often going by the nickname Gahu. Lei was on the DNA database due to a prior conviction for arson and had a poor reputation with the community. In spite of this, he was good friends with Guo and Wang, best friends according to some, and the two would often visit each other. Lei was also described as being anxious after the two went missing and was one of those who helped search for the two. Or so he did initially. When the police put Lei under covert surveillance and followed him, he acted perfectly normal. The police soon received a tip that led to a breakthrough. Lei had recently rented an old house nearby to Guo and Wang. The house was unoccupied, dilapidated, and by the standards of the area remote. Lei told the landlord that he rented the home on behalf of a friend, but nobody ever lived on the property after Lei rented it. The police entered the home and found a thick layer of dust everywhere. But even more damningly, they found Guo's slippers and a long hair the same length as Wang Xian. The police also found more cigarette butts littered on the floor that were of the same brand found in the car. If the DNA matched Lei, then the case could be considered solved. The police tested the cigarettes found in the house, and they did not belong to Lei or anyone in the local database. Since this indicated that Lei likely had an accomplice, the police worked to identify whoever he may have been. This is when their covert surveillance came into play. While on the weekdays Lei behaved normally, on the weekends he often went to Zillenhut to secretly meet a man. These meetings were meant to be secret and were always short, with the two only exchanging a few short words before leaving. This man had been living in different small hotels and only came out to buy food during the day, usually staying behind closed doors. The man was identified as Zhao Lijai, nicknamed the Second Gang Zhao, and Lei had met back in prison and became friends. Zhao, who had been serving a sentence for assault, was released in May of 2013, and Lei was the one waiting outside to pick him up. The two were arrested and interrogated on August 31st, where they confessed. After his release, Zhao struggled to find a job and thus was struggling financially. That is when Zhao suggested to Lei that they murder and rob somebody, preferably with a lot of money. After Zhang and Chen didn't fall for their trick, that was when he decided to make his good friend Guo his target. Before the case, Guo had also lent Lei some money which Lei didn't pay back. At 1 p.m. Lei called Guo from a temporary phone number and told Guo that he wanted to pay back and to meet him at his rental house in order to do it. When Guo entered the house, Lei and Zhao immediately attacked and tied him up with duct tape. They then stole Guo's bank card, and only then did they find out just how much money Guo had. Guo's wife Wang was targeted because Lei and Zhao feared that Guo told her where he was going before leaving, and thus she'd report them to the police. They drove Guo's car back to his house and told Wang that he was drunk and sent for her to pick him up. Not expecting this to take long, Wang didn't turn off the TV or lights when she left to go with them. As soon as they entered the home, they attacked and began strangling Wang as well as stealing her jewelry. Zhao took a step further and violated her corpse once Wang had finally passed away. Once they were finished, they purchased 2 nylon bags and stuffed their bodies inside. They then went to a ditch near a river where they buried the bags. After their confession, the two led the police to the bodies. So since it's been established that Lei and Zhao are the culprits, how was the behavior of the other compelling suspects explained? Well, for the 3 migrant workers and Tan Ying, it was just poor timing. The migrant workers didn't know whose house they went to, and Tan didn't know how much money Guo had. The 3 migrant workers were later tracked down and were working at another brick factory nearby. They simply decided that the wages offered by the South Coal Mine were too low, and their treatment abysmal, so they decided to leave and find a better employer. Meanwhile, as for Wang, Tianyi, and Lin, their sudden money came not from murder, but pure luck, as the two had been gambling and their winnings, unfortunately, happened to come at the exact same time as this case. They lied to the police because they didn't want to be implicated or wrongfully convicted for the murder, and because gambling in China is illegal as is. They were spying on the police in hopes they wouldn't discover their gambling and in hopes that they'd start investigating other suspects. On April 13, 2015, the Zillengal League Intermediate People's Court handed down Lei Zhanqing and Zhao Lijai a death sentence.